Yep.
This is Steve from Boxing UK. Pleasure to be joined by John Rawling. John, you had the unique position of being almost the closest man to the ring on Saturday.
Yeah, well, it was quite an occasion, and what an amazing sort of atmospheric historical venue, Church House, just down near Westminster Abbey, where Parliament was moved during the war because of the Houses of Parliament being bombed out. I mean, there's so much history around the place, and to be broadcasting from that hall in the middle of the place was fantastic. And there was as far as you can get in a small, confined, behind closed doors type arena, there was an amazing atmosphere, and as it turned out, I thought it was a fascinating fight. Maybe not quite the classic that some anticipated or hoped for, but I thought it was a pretty dramatic fight in many ways.
I think you said in commentary, John, didn't you, as the fight builder was getting there, you were getting nervous. Was it that tension in the air, even without the crowd?
Well, we've been talking about it for so long, haven't we, Steve? You know, I think really it's one of the biggest British domestic fights that I can remember for a long time, up with Groves Froch and Groves de Gale. So far as heavyweight fights are concerned, you know, it's the biggest and the greatest sense of anticipation that I've had for it since Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. It was that sort of a level, because I think it was partly because we've talked about it for so long, haven't we? It was announced way back in the spring, and it was originally going to be happening in April, I think, and finally we get it on at the end of November. So we've been talking about it and talking about it and talking about it, and opinion was divided. And I think that buzz, you know, that sense of anticipation was great, and it just, you know, I certainly had the old big occasion tingles, because apart from anything else, you think, for goodness sake, do it justice. And you've always got your detractors. There's some people for whom you can't ever do the right thing, but you know, you just hope that for most you do it justice.
Yeah. One of the questions I was going to ask you, John, is before the fight, a lot of people said it was a 50-50 fight, and it almost seemed split. It was either a 50-50 fight or Dubois was a runaway favourite. Did you agree with that at all before the fight, or did you think it was a lot closer than the bookmakers were making it out to be?
I always said it was a lot closer. You know, I mean, I wasn't going to predict one way or another beforehand, because that's not fair on the fighters, because word gets back, and you don't want people to be thinking that you're biased one way or the other. But do you know, the bookies had Dubois 4-1 on. And I thought that was crazy. I really did think those odds were ridiculous. A 3-1 shot was Joe Joyce, and I thought it was a bit telling at the press conference, which was staged on the Thursday. And at that press conference, you know, you kind of know when athletes are in fantastic shape. And yeah, Daniel should be 23 years old and always walks around fit as a fiddle. But Joe was absolutely blooming. You know, you see him and he had that sort of sheen of somebody in fantastic condition. He'd clearly got his preparations absolutely right. And when you talk to the two guys, I thought it was clear that Joe was the more sort of composed, and maybe just because of his greater age and greater life experience, and having competed in the likes of the Olympic Games, having been to an Olympic final when, by the way, he was unlucky not to come away with the gold medal. But having had those life skills and travelled around the world, maybe he was just able to take it in his stride just a little bit more than Daniel. And I thought that Daniel was looking a wee bit stressed up. And certainly in the run-up to the fight, you know, I mean, Daniel's power and his knockout punch was obviously a big, big factor. But people who were saying that Joe was just going to get blown away, I think they were delusional. You know, it was never going to be that sort of fight.
A fair few did think that, though, John, didn't they?
A lot did. Oh yeah, a lot did. You know, I mean, and one or two people who I'd respect as well. But if you dug around actually in the trade, I think that more people thought that it was going to be close, and a lot more people thought that Joe had a real chance of pulling it off. You know, if you speak to people involved close to Daniel, then obviously you're going to hear a big pro Daniel Dubois prediction and sentiment. But I think if you actually asked around the sport, there were a lot of people whose opinion I would respect, who thought Joe had a great chance. And certainly everybody, anything to do with the elite amateur squad, with the Robert McCracken's squad up there in Sheffield, I think that anybody associated with that gave Joe a great chance.
Before we talk about the aftermath, John, and there has been quite an aftermath, commentating on the fight, how did you see it going? Round by round?
Well, I mean, I think at halfway, Daniel was probably ahead. And every time he cut loose, he looked good. But he wasn't sustaining his attacks. And when it became clear fairly early on, I think even in the first 2 or 3 rounds, that he was marking up and that eye was starting to get damaged. And as it began to swell, I remember saying in the commentary, I wonder if that's going to be a factor the further the fight goes. And, you know, I mean, I'm not any sort of genius. Anybody looking at that could see that it was worsening by the minute. And Joe did a great job of working behind that jab and concentrating his attack on the damaged left eye, which is precisely what he had to do. He got his tactics right. I think Richie had Daniel marginally ahead when we came to that 10th round. I was slightly the other way. I had Joe, I think, ahead by a round when it came to that point. But it was still anybody's fight. But you know, the injury was very much worse than we thought. And although there were 3 rounds left, I strongly suspect that Daniel had been told, you've got to get out there and finish this, because if not, you're going to either the referee's going to stop it, or we're going to pull you out, or whatever. So I think he was under you know, an absolute must to go out there and stop Joe Joyce, and it very quickly became evident in that 10th round that he couldn't do it, and he took a left hand absolutely flush on that damaged eye, and he was being pinged by right hands as well, and he couldn't see them coming. And when he got hit, the sheer pain and I think the frustration of not being able to avoid those attacks forced him to do what he did. And maybe in so doing, you know, there's been a few people who queued up to say, oh, he's quit and he's not got fighting heart. But it may well be that he saved his boxing career by doing what he did.
Yeah, that's, again, like the pre-fight odds, the post-fight aftermath, again, it's almost split, John. You've got half the people saying that could be the most sensible decision he could have made. And then you've got the other half saying that he quit. And hey, let me just stop you there. I mean, it is beyond doubt. You know, nobody likes the Q word in boxing. Professional fighters don't like to hear it, and you don't like to say it, I don't think. But yeah, of course he did quit. But he quit for a reason, and a very big reason. He's got a fractured orbital eye socket in his left eye. And that's the injury that Kell Brook had after the Gennady Golovkin fight. And then he had his other eye damaged after the Spence fight. And, you know, there's a pretty coherent and big argument that Kell was never the same after that Golovkin fight. And to actually suggest that Daniel should have fought on for another 3 rounds when he couldn't see and having that sort of an injury, I think that's a little unfair. Yeah, even in the Crawford fight, John, after Crawford landed flush, the first thing Kell did was tap the cheek where the injury was.
Yeah, and that's the worry, of course, with Daniel. But he's only 23 years old. He's not been assessed by a specialist as yet, because they can't really look at it properly and really truly assess the extent of the damage and what needs to be done until the swelling's gone. So that's going to take a while for the swelling around the eye to go down, and only then will they be able to have a look and decide exactly what needs to be done. You know, so there's a lot of armchair specialists who are making their thoughts known. and armchair specialists, I think, who are passing medical judgments which they're not remotely qualified to take. So I think for the moment, I think it's a good idea for people to just hold their horses and wait to hear what the actual damage is and what the long-term recovery plan is going to be. And aside from the physical damage, Steve, it's the psychological damage. And I don't think anybody really will understand the extent of that until Daniel gets back in a gym, gets back to training, and works to find out what he can do and what he can't do. But it's going to take some time before we really know what the long-term damage of Saturday night is going to be.
Yeah, quite rightly, John. You said he did quit. Is that always a negative thing, though? Because it's the negative connotations, isn't it, that come with the quit word? And even some quite established professionals have been quite negative towards the fact that Daniel took that knee.
Well, I did qualify it, to be fair, before before that gets quoted up or you show a tiny little bit of me saying, yes, he quit. He quit for a reason. Yeah. He stopped. He was on his knee, the referee right in front of him counting. Daniel could have stood up if he'd chosen to. He chose not to. So you could, you use whatever word you like, but quit is a tough word, but that's what happened. But the thing is that he stopped fighting, which is what I would prefer to say. He stopped fighting for a reason. And the reason and the extent of the injury we don't yet know. And, let's just wait a week or two before those judgments are made. I think there is a justification for doing what he did, to not continue, and nobody really knows the extent of the pain and what was going through his head when that injury happened and when he took that punch in the 10th round and decided to do what he did. I think you have to give a professional athlete a degree of sympathy.
Yeah. John, can I ask a strange question on that? Can you explain what maybe the difference is between taking a really good body shot and not being able to continue, and taking a shot to an already injured eye and not being able to continue? Because to me, they're two very similar things. You've suffered an injury, you've taken a shot, you can't continue, fight's over. But very rarely do you get called a quitter when you've been hit with a flush body shot.
No, well, I mean, the most recent example of that was the Josh Taylor fight, wasn't it, I suppose? The high-profile fight when his opponent went down to a body shot, and a lot of people watching thought he did a bit of a dying swan act, and that he could have got up had he wished to, and the fight could have gone on. But again, you don't know the extent of the damage, and people who were close to him, whose opinion again I respect, said that the following morning he was still in pain. So while he hadn't got broken ribs, he'd been obviously seriously hurt by what Josh Taylor delivered, and whether or not he could have got up or not, he didn't get up, and that's the decision. That's the decision of the fighter. It's such a difficult area, isn't it? I mean, and who are we to condemn a man for saying in his own mind, that's it, I can take no more? It's all very well wanting to go out on your shield and people saying, I would never, ever quit. But if you take those extra rounds, as Daniel could have done, and are then left with damage which can never be put right, then who's the fool then?
Precisely. John, can we move on to Joe? Because a lot of talk has been about Daniel, and it seems to almost have overshadowed what was an absolutely fantastic performance from Joe Joyce.
I thought Joe Joyce was outstanding. He got his tactics absolutely right, keeping it long, going in and out, working behind the jab. I think the key factor in the fight was the way in which he took Daniel's jab away from him. Because Daniel has got a great left-hand lead. Everybody who's been hit by it says that it's like being hit by a backhand, never mind by a jab. And he has a great jab, and I think Joe did brilliantly taking that away. He had the tactic, simple if you like, of when under pressure, moving away to his right, so as he's moving away from that overhand right, which is the big danger knockout punch of Daniel Dubois. And it sounds very, very simple, but in the heat of conflict, it's remembering to keep doing it and keeping on doing it. And Joe did that. And he may have been trailing at the halfway stage. I thought he was behind after 6 rounds. But the perception was that his fantastic engine, his stamina, and the old juggernaut ability to keep on coming, that would serve him well in the second half of the fight, and it was doing. I think he'd probably won rounds 7, 8, 9 before the end came. And if he had been trailing, by the time that the end of the fight came, it was very, very close. You know, Victor Loughlin, remember, had him a number of points ahead. I think he had him 3 points ahead on his card. I don't quite understand how anybody could have Daniel 5 points ahead, which is what one of the judges had. But, you know, I think it was close at that stage, but there's no doubt that the momentum had changed and that Joe was coming on strong. And I had a chat with Glenn McCrory afterwards, my old mate who was world cruiserweight champion. And Glenn's opinion was that Joe, because he is so strong, takes a great shot and is a huge man. You know, you forget just how big he is. He's 6'6" and absolutely solid as a rock. You know, he's got a physique like an oak tree. He is so hard. And it was Glenn's opinion that any heavyweights in the world would have difficulty with Joe Joyce. They might beat him, but they wouldn't have an easy night. And that's from somebody who's been around as a commentator for many, many years and has commentated on some of the best heavyweights in history. You know, Glenn's been at ringside and seen Riddick Bowe, seen Evander Holyfield, seen Mike Tyson, seen Buster Douglas, seen Lennox Lewis. So he knows what he's on about. And he thinks that Joe is a very, very tough man who could certainly give Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua a run for their money. He's not saying that he'd necessarily beat them. I don't think Glenn would say that he would beat them, but he certainly thinks that he's strong enough and difficult enough to give them a fight.
Yeah, that was the next question, John. Just because he's 35, he's going to have to be moved along quite quickly, and there's talk of Usyk next. How far do you think he can go? Because if Joshua vacates, that could potentially be a world title fight, couldn't it?
Well, I think that's the obvious scenario, isn't it? There might be moves to try and get a rematch against Daniel, but that injury is going to take some time to heal. And I would question whether it would be wise to throw Daniel straight back into what really would be a career make or break fight in a rematch. I think far better than that is if the title does get made vacant, which seems to be a very possible scenario, to put Joe in against Usyk. Now, you'll have your own ideas, and everybody watching this now will have their ideas. But I think Joe has got a great chance against Oleksandr Usyk, because I didn't think Usyk showed himself emphatically and convincingly to be a genuine heavyweight against Chisora. And I think that, you know, Joyce is a bigger, more physical man. And I think that Usyk would have a lot of problems with Joe Joyce, not least because of his sheer size and his ability behind that jab. And I think the dream scenario for Daniel Dubois and maybe for Joe Joyce somewhere in the future is for the rematch to happen, and for that rematch to be for the WBO title. Now, that would be huge. That would be huge. And that would be something which I think the boxing world would really look forward to. Joshua against Fury, I think, is inevitably going to happen. But then whoever prevails from that, whoever comes through, Usyk, Joyce, Dubois when he gets fit again, you know, whoever comes through on the WBO side would have a great opportunity to fight whoever eventually prevails between Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua.
Fascinating times ahead, isn't it?
Very much so, yeah, very much so. It's good, isn't it? You know, this is the most exciting time for British heavyweight boxing that I can ever recall. You know, I think they've obviously been better fighters than those around now. Not massively better, but I think there have been better fighters. I still think Lennox Lewis, from a British perspective, stands right at the top of the tree. But it is so exciting for fight fans to be able to say that the the major players, the big players in world heavyweight boxing right now are the British contingent. We have the best, and you have never in the history of the sport been able to have said that before.
Absolutely. John, can I end with a couple on yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Commentary. I don't know if you remember a few weeks back, Joe Gallagher said that the commentary box at Sky was a little bit too close to the ring. Have you had any of these problems with the BT setup?
What, you mean because they can hear them?
Yeah, they said that the judges were swayed by what was being said in commentary.
Well, nobody said that to me directly, but I think it's inevitably that you're going to be heard on Saturday, because it is such a small arena at Church House. We were in a soundproofed box, so I would very much doubt if judges and corners were able to hear what we're saying. So it was a very significant fight, and there's no way that they were swayed, I don't think, by what Richie and myself were saying. And if Joe may well have a point, but these are exceptional times in which we're working, and what's the alternative? It is very, very difficult. And I think it's just great that in the current climate that we've been able to see a fight of this stature on television, and not on pay-per-view television either. I think it was great and very good for boxing that fight took place on last Saturday night.
Absolutely. How much are we missing the fans though, John?
A lot. Fighters feed off support. I think we all get the adrenaline rush of hearing the crowd's reaction, and of course fans. They'll be sitting watching at home and enjoying it as best they can. But there's nothing quite like actually going along and watching a fight live, is there? Whether it be at York Hall, Bethnal Green, or at the O2 or in Wembley Stadium, there's nothing quite like being able to say, yeah, I was there, I was part of that crowd. And the sooner we get back to normal, for everybody's sake, the better. But, for the time being, I think people should applaud Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, and the others who are able to get fights on behind closed doors and keep on bringing us the contests and the entertainment that we want. And also, I think they ought to give great credit to the boxers who are prepared to get out there, sometimes not for quite the purses that they would normally have got, but they're prepared to get out there, give it a go, and actually do what they do best, which is professionally fighting.
Well said. Two more, John, I promise. Last time we spoke about Nigel Benn's potential comeback. And I remember you quite clearly saying anybody that was having conversations with Nigel Benn should be telling him not to do so. Is the Mike Tyson Roy Jones any different?
Well, yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought it could be, actually. I think it was a lot more entertaining than a lot of people believed it was going to be. Mike's got himself into decent shape. He's obviously worked really hard, taken off something like 100 pounds to go in there, pretty close to what his optimum fighting weight was. Roy Jones, I don't think, was in any sort of shape really on Saturday, and I think he was very fortunate. Maybe it was politically correct to do so, to give him the draw, but I think most people who watched it thought that Tyson won that fight. Whether it was good for boxing, I don't know. But what you can say is that it brought in a lot of viewers who were prepared to pay money and watch it and go down the old nostalgia trip. And I think getting the YouTube fighters on as well attracts a whole new audience. And maybe this is to an extent the new reality, and we have to go with it. Nobody was hurt or hurt badly in that main fight of the night. Mike and Roy will come away from it, and they'll be able to count their money and be able to move on. And I think that's about the shape of it. But is it good for boxing? I'm not so sure.
Last one this weekend. Yarde and Arthur. Are you in the commentary box, John?
I am.
Looking
Same
forward to
place. Oh yeah. definitely. Good fight, really good fight. Really good fight. You know, you've got Anthony Yarde, who he's had a horrible year, losing his father and his grandmother to this wretched COVID virus. He's still coming back and rebuilding after the disappointment of the Kovalev defeat. Lyndon Artur has done nothing wrong as a professional. He'll have studied Kovalev's performance, and he'll believe that as the taller man with that terrific left-hand lead, and he's pretty mobile as well, that he's got the tools to make this a very awkward night for Anthony Yarde. Yarde will think he's got too much power, and I know that his trainer, Tunde Jay, thinks that Anthony's going to have the strength and the power to finish this fight by knockout. That's not going to be a very popular theory within Lyndon Arthur's camp. They'll think that he's going to spring the upset. And again, it's a fascinating fight. And it's another one which I'm not going to make a prediction here and now. But what I do say is that I think it will be a very, very entertaining fight. And I certainly don't think Anthony Yarde's just going to go in there and steamroller the man. I don't think that's going to happen.
John Rawling, anything else before you go?
Well, just one final word before I sign off. Can I just return to that whole whether or not Daniel Dubois quit or not, and some of the very disparaging things which have been said about one or two fellow professionals who arguably ought to know better, saying that once you've quit, you'll always be a quitter, or that's been the inference. Go and tell that to Roberto Duran, hands of stone, one of the hardest men in the history of the sport. Go back to the second fight against Sugar Ray Leonard. Fantastic fight first time around. Duran won it. The rematch, Sugar Ray Leonard had different tactics. Duran didn't like the fact that Leonard didn't want to go toe-to-toe with him, wouldn't take the macho approach, and effectively he quit, turned his back and said, no more, I'm having no more of this. And to the astonishment of everybody around that fight, which is now, the better part of 40 years ago, to the astonishment of everybody, he said, no, I'm not going to do it. People then probably said, oh, he's a quitter. Is he going to always be a quitter? Well, we know the answer to that, don't we? He came back and showed that he had that warrior heart in fight after fight after fight. And at the age of 37, when most people thought that he'd never win a world title again, that's precisely what he went and did against Iran Barkley. Iran the Blade Barkley, who was a strong, feared world champion, a big puncher. And Roberto Duran went in against him and he outboxed him and he beat him. Was he a quitter? No, he most definitely wasn't.
John Rawling, I don't think anyone could have put it more eloquently. Thank you very much for your time, John. Well said.
All right, cheers, mate.
You take care.